How can we calculate negative hours here in Excel? So I brought two different examples, radical examples, and I'm going to start with this first one here, where I have, let's say, this following question. A machine, I have here a machine workload time. So for example, the machine starts to work on the Monday at 7 a.m. and it stops to work at 5 p.m. How many hours this machine just worked on the Monday? I can do it just using a simple formula here in Excel. Let me delete it. Let's start with the equal sign. The end value minus the start value is gonna return for me the correct result, that is equal to 10 hours. So if I have here a machine that starts to work at 7 a.m. and it stops to work at 5 p.m., I got the result 10 hours because this machine just worked 10 hours in the Monday. However, if I just make sure all the rows contain exactly the same formula, I'm gonna click, hold and drag down. Many cells here are gonna have this arrow, this pound sign. This happened because this is a negative value, a negative hour. This is happened due to the fact that whenever we're gonna make a subtraction, for example, I can use, let's say, 10 minus 2, and it's equal to 8. 8 is a positive number. However, if I just change the position, so let's say I'm gonna use 2 minus 10. Due to the fact that 10 is a greater number than 2, I'm gonna get here a negative result. So let's say minus 8, and this is the same that I happen here with this result. So for example, the 5 p.m. is a great number, is a great value than 2 p.m. So this is why when you use this formula here, a number minus a greater number, we're gonna got a negative result. So whenever we have this situation here, we need to just change the position. So instead of I use, for example, the end value minus the start value, I can just change it. So I'm gonna use the start point minus the end one. That way I can make sure I'm gonna get a positive result. So how can I make it possible? Because imagine if I just have a spreadsheet with 1,000 of rows. I cannot make it manually. Whenever I got a row, I just switch the position of the values of the subtraction. I cannot make it because it's gonna take me a long time to make all these changes. However, we can just automate this task using the if function here in Excel. So this is how I can do it. Let me delete it. Equal sign, if function, double click it. And as my logical test, I can use the following rule, for example. If my end value is greater than my start value, I can just use the end minus start. However, if this criteria, if this condition does not match, I can change. So I can use the start point minus the end one. Okay, so this is what I'm gonna just type in here inside the if function. My logical test here is equal to if my endpoint is greater than, look at the sign that I just typed in here, the great sign, okay? If it's greater than my start point, everything's fine here. So, comma, I'm gonna use the endpoint minus the start one, comma. However, if this criteria does not match, I can change. So I'm gonna use the start point, the start value, minus the end value. Close parentheses, enter. Let me just click, hold, and drag down. So whenever now I got a negative result, I not got a negative result. So this is the point. So whenever the if function identifies that my end is not greater than my start point, it's just gonna change the subtraction position of the numbers, okay? However, I just got here just a suspicious result. Look here, 19 hours. If my machine starts to work at 11 p.m. and it goes up to 4 a.m., man, the result is not gonna go to 90 hours. So let's just count it manually. 11, and then I go to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 5 hours, not 90. This is happening because when you just switch the position, the Excel is counting it in a reverse way. So instead of just Excel's, here we have, let's say, the clock, and so let's say here you have the 11, and here you have the 4 in the clock, okay? And instead of Excel doing it, go to 11 to 4, and it's equal to 5 hours. 24 up to 11 again. So this is why I'm getting with the 90 hours of work. So how can I make this formula work properly? I can make a little change here. Let me just double click here in the if function, and instead of just using this second formula here, instead of course I was about to delete it, but instead of use the minus, I'm gonna use the add sign, okay, the plus sign here to add these two values. And just before the first value that I have here, I'm gonna add the number 1 minus, okay? So this is what you're gonna look like, 1 minus the start point plus add to the end point, okay? So this is what you're gonna make my Excel calculates. Instead of just go to 4 to 11 that way, it's gonna go that way, okay? 11 to 4, and then I'm gonna got 5 hours in the result, for example, in this situation here. So let me just press enter here. Let me just click, hold and drag down, and yeah, we're done. So this is the formula, guys, and yeah, it's a little bit tricky to work with hours here in Excel. You need to know exactly what you're doing, because when you work with hours in Excel, it's always you need to do some tricky to solve some silly problems, some small problems. Now here in the second example, it's almost the same that we just made here before. However, here I have 2 blocks of the first time in timeout. Here the time in timeout, the first one, and then the second block with the second time in timeout. Let's say here I have these 2 blocks because let's say here is a lunch break, for example, and I'm gonna do the same thing. However, instead of just using just one time in timeout like we just do here before, I need to use these 2 blocks, time in timeout and then time in timeout again. So here I'm gonna have 2 criteria, 2 conditions, the first block and then the second block. Let me just delete here what I just did before. I'm gonna start here with the equal sign, the if function, double click it, and here we have of course some hours, some values that are gonna have a negative result, because look, here I have an employee that just starts to work in the 8 p.m. and it finish at 1 a.m., come back 2 a.m., and then he goes away 5 a.m. So this, of course, is gonna lead me to a negative result. However, we can just use the if function, as we did before, to solve this problem. So my first logical test is if my timeout is greater than my time in. So I just gonna use here the simple formula, that is timeout minus time in, comma. However, if it's not true, I'm gonna use 1 minus time in plus timeout, okay? Close parentheses, I can press enter here, and let's just check it if it's all correct. Just click and hold and drag it down, and I know that it's just missing the second part of the formula that we just need to add, to append another if function here to make sure it's complete. However, let's just take a look to make sure everything is fine here. So let's say here the employee works to 2 p.m. into 2 a.m. So let's say 10, 11, 11, 0, 1, 2. Okay, 4 hours. And yeah, I got here the 4 hours as a result. So it's correct. Let me just now double click here in the first cell and make sure we just write the second part of this function. I'm gonna append another if function. However, to append it, I'm gonna use the plus sign to make sure I'm gonna add the first value to the another, or I need to just add the hours that the employee just worked here in the first block and to the second one, okay? I need to append the hours the employee just worked here in this first block to the second block. I need to sum these 2 values to add one value to each other. Plus sign, if function, double click it. What is my logical test here? I want to check if my timeout is greater than time in, for example. And if this condition match, I can use the timeout minus time in, comma. However, if it's this condition, this criteria does not match, I can just use the 1 minus time in plus timeout. Close parentheses, press enter. Now we can click, hold, and drag it out. Okay, yeah, all of these results here are correct. So that way I can just make sure every time I'm gonna do some math with hours in Excel, even if the result got we got a negative result, I'm gonna get here properly formula, properly result. I hope this video can help you guys, and if you have any questions, just comment down below, let me know, and I see you tomorrow. As every day has a new video, I see you there.